All right. Welcome everybody back to this week's episode of Verticals, weekly business show on all things vertical tech and AI. If you're like Nick and I and you like jamming out and nerding out on vertical SaaS, this is the place for you. So welcome, Nick. Good to see you again, man.
Good to see you, buddy. Excited for another app. This episode is with Mike Kopko, the founder and CEO of Pearl Health. From working with Ray Dalio at Bridgewater to taking Oscar public, he's attacking one of the biggest problems in healthcare, and we think there's no one better to do it. Stick around till the end because Mike's view on AI's opportunity to completely transform healthcare blew our mind. You won't want to miss it.
In this episode, you'll learn how the healthcare maze works, how figuring out who pays you is hypercritical to success in health tech, and even how to work with government-related programs as a small startup. We also share the latest in healthcare vertical SaaS fundings so you can get up to speed on this beast of a vertical. All right, we'll dive in today. So first order of business is our weekly market pulse. We got a couple of interesting ones for you, and then we'll bring on our Titan. Today's going to be pretty healthcare centric. So a lot of sub verticals within healthcare, obviously massive industry, massive market. A lot of interesting things being done in the age of AI. So a lot to dive into, a lot to talk about. So before we get into that, I wanted to share this piece, Nick, with you on Contrary Research. Contrary does a good job. They put out a lot of good research content. This was a pretty sizable report. I don't know if you came across this. The big summary kind of TLDR from their report is 42% of enterprise AI initiatives were discontinued in 2024. So like we're looking at, a 60-ish%, high 50-ish% kind of failure rate in terms of enterprise AI adoption, which I found really fascinating. I feel like I've only heard the contrary to that. And I didn't plan for that conundrum, by the way. But so anyways, a lot in here. We'll link it in the show notes. It's a really good piece, pretty substantial essay here. But yeah, that stood out to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Definitely a big part of the narrative these days. And by the way, everyone should check out the good work they do over at Contrary. They do some great breakdowns of vertical AI businesses and others. But yeah, I think that's been a big part of the narrative is, what actually is the adoption in enterprise. And I think we talked a little bit about this last time, but in some ways, AI adoption has been consumer-esque, right? We think about ChatGPT or Lovable, right? And I mean, the growth is certainly consumer-esque, right? The question is, will the retention reflect that? Maybe outside of ChatGPT, a lot of the models have seen questionable retention. And so what are we actually seeing in the enterprise? When I see numbers like this personally, I question them a bit. In my mind, I think to the sort of survey they would have to do to come up with this number. And they're probably talking to enterprises. And, if you're a giant company and you have an AI initiative, I mean, how many of you listeners worked at or work at a big company? And you know that these innovation initiatives sometimes are pretty, half-baked, pretty weak, right?
Lackluster. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you want to signal you're doing something, but is there really budget behind it, right? Is there really executive buy-in? So I kind of question the integrity of the numbers, but I also do think there's validity to it, right? I look at, I talked a bit about this in a panel we did with Emergence and Greylock and Scale and some great GPs. And, a lot of ways, look, it's a great thing that we're seeing incredible growth out of vertical AI businesses. At the same time, when you have a business that grows from 0 to 20 million ARR overnight, I think Jake at Emergence made this point. It introduces maybe a little bit of additional risk because you don't have those historical data points on retention. And so I think right now there's just a lot of companies trying out different things, and some stuff is going to stick, some stuff is not. Like we're still in that testing period. So I think to be honest, it's natural and healthy.
So I'm generally aligned. I think the one area for pushback or something I think founders really need to think about is we have really promised the world in terms of what our AI products can do. And, I see a lot of launch videos and, we're making ROI promises of complete like staff replacement. And yeah, that's true in a lot of cases. I think founders should be super cautious of promising that because you can still promise an incredible ROI without elimination of staff, right? And tying directly into the services. Like I think so many venture-backed founders think that they're pitching their products to like a VC audience instead of an enterprise audience with a CIO. And so look, if you can come in and set the proper expectation and show, hey, this is what we're going to do and nail that and say, yeah, are we going to get there where we can cut 5% or 10% of this particular salary and headcount? Absolutely. But making that claim on day one or like on your hero landing page, unless you're very sure that you can actually achieve that, I think is dangerous. And so I just caution founders to not overpromise. I remember we had a story at my business where I signed up a $600,000 ARR customer in like our 13th month of business, and I thought I was on top of the world. You know how many dollars I saw out of that $600,000 ARR contract, Nick?
I'm guessing zero.
Probably negative with the time that we took into it. And the reason was I promised the world. I was a young founder. I was probably like 20 years old at the time, and I promised the world, and I couldn't deliver on the world. And so, it was a good learning lesson for me. It's like, it was an awesome board meeting to show it. And then the next board meeting sucked because we've totally failed to deliver.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, Luke. I mean, we're going to start seeing this, right? And frankly, in some of the founders we talked to, we're already seeing this AI fatigue in which, everyone's trying to capture every single industry, every vertical. Some businesses that maybe they don't really care about the AI and they've got 100 people, banging on their doors to sell them some tool. If they try the first few and they suck, they're going to be a little harder to sell into. So leaning into that real world, tangible, provable time to value, I think matters a lot.
Awesome. Love it. All right, let's jump over to your next piece here.
Yeah. So, funding announcement here. A lot of you may have seen this, but TimeCare raised just under $100 million. TimeCare, for those of you who haven't come across it, that is I'd call it a vertical AI platform, founded in 2020. So probably AI native to an extent, but they deliver oncology care navigation. Let's break that down. So care navigation, that's really, you have some sort of ailment, you have to get medical treatment for that, work with specialists, providers, etc. That can be, I think, as everyone knows, certainly me included, that can be a pretty hairy journey, right? Who do you get a referral to? Who do you follow up with? Where do you get your labs? Where does the info live? It's a nightmare, labyrinthine, Byzantine, horrible process, right? There's a lot of cost locked up in that, right? In terms of time and effort on behalf of providers. And that cost does get reflected in what, payers, the insurance companies have to pay. That cost inflates overall healthcare costs in our country. So can you use AI to streamline that journey? And effectively, that's what TimeCare is doing in the oncology space. So helping cancer patients, which, is the number one kind of specialty by cost to the healthcare system overall. So, very cool mission here. Obviously, Time is not the only one, but I'd say has been one of the first movers. It was actually unclear who led this round, and maybe that's on me for not looking it up. But we do know that Andreessen, AliCorp, actually both of whom are also Pearl Health investors, who are our guest in a few minutes here. CVS as well for First Cressy. So great backers. They expect to serve, they say, 40,000 patients this year. So great uptake. But I wanted to really bring it up for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, certainly thematic given our vertical titan this week, but also, care navigation. If you think about that, you've got to touch on many different providers, many different health systems, data sources, EHRs, members, sometimes their families. It's a gnarly, kind of integration process, if you will. So Time, they have something they call Time Box, which really just tries to get all that data in one place. Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious if we see out of, these sort of kind of, call it agentic navigation plays, the same sort of lock-in as you would with being the system of record itself, or if rather you see it as being, like a huge obstacle, because that's that's about as gnarly as I could imagine in terms of integration and data centralization. What do you think about that, Luke?
Yeah, so a couple immediate thoughts reaction here. One, I absolutely love the thesis. I love the business. I think what they're doing is absolutely, incredible. It's like the double impact, right? If you can build a great business while making the world a better place, I think those are the, great things to get behind. So, and you can see in the investor base, it's pretty incredible. They got CVS Health involved. They got JP Morgan Chase Health involved. Humana, Texas Oncology also contributed in this round. So, they're obviously onto something. And I can just tell you from my own personal experience, and I don't think it's unique. It's like navigating the healthcare system, regardless of what's going on with you, is a total nightmare. So it makes a ton of sense with you. I think the retention lock-in can be, not quite at the system of record level, but it can be pretty darn incredible if you're doing a good job. I was sitting here as you were talking about this. I was like, where do you even start with a business like that? Like healthcare is so different than traditional vertical SaaS where, you got a wedge product, you go multi-product, you eventually get to, platform level, you add payments, blah, 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 like the same story in a lot of these verticals, but healthcare is so different. Like, do you know where these guys started and what they moved into? Because they're serving like a lot of different constituents here.
I think we should ask Mike in a couple of minutes because he'll have a better view. But ultimately, I think what's interesting here is you've got a couple different customers, if you will, right? You have obviously the patient, right? You have to have a great patient experience, and the payers want that too. You got the payers, and ultimately that's what matters because that's where the revenue comes from, and then you also got the providers, which are obviously important, right? So
does insurance cover these navigation platforms?
Yeah, they do. I mean,
Okay.
They have to, like, Time makes money by contracting with payers, right?
Okay.
Or other risk-bearing entities. As far as I understand it, it's a bit of a hybrid. So they can have what may look like more of a traditional SaaS model where it's like a per member per month fee. But I think where Time is going, and at least generates a portion of their revenue today, is in risk sharing. So they'll have a contract in which if they generate savings, they get a portion of that. And in some cases, it may very well be two-sided where they're also on the hook if costs are higher than the contract stipulates. So I think this is the other really interesting thing. And one thing that Mike will want to touch on with as well is, where we're headed theoretically is, a value-based care model in healthcare where, we can actually start tying outcomes to costs in an effective way. That's a big, think about that as a software company in any other world. If you've got to tie directly to savings and you're on the hook, if you don't deliver those savings, that's really putting your money where your mouth is, especially in a place like oncology, a space like oncology, which is, that's probably one of the biggest costs on payers' minds.
No, I love it. Well, good for these guys. The only critique I have on them is they raised $97 million in this round. Could they not find the other three? Could we not get to a clean 100?
I know. Seriously, at least just round it up. Come on. Super cool company. I've been following them since the beginning. I just wanted to end on one point here. So, there's been a bit of news on this, but new fund focused on healthcare AI. So VZVC, one of the GPs there, Zach Werner, former Snapdragon, made a comment I ran across that I thought was really relevant here. He said, "Not every TAM in healthcare is large enough, but the number of people who can slap application layers in someone else's LLM is very high. Scribes is not a wholly complicated thing to do, but full stack complex care navigation across multiple specialties is. Maybe this kind of complexity is the place to find it."
Yep, I love that. Makes a lot of sense. Well, cool. We'll jump to the next one here. Who did get from 97 to 100? They're nothing against Time. I'm just messing with you guys. But we got another funding announcement I think is interesting. Inspiron raises 100 million Series B to lead senior living's AI-driven future. So, I was really curious about this company because I was sitting there thinking, I was like, how does AI help senior living facilities and like, what does it actually mean in that particular vertical? And I think there's a lot of similarities between what Time is doing. It looks like they've got some care planning, like patient navigation. They've got some hardware baked in with emergency phone calls, kind of workforce optimization, which we all know is a total nightmare in healthcare. So it doesn't look like it's an EHR, but something that kind of sits alongside that, which I believe is the case with Mike and Pearl, who we're going to talk to. And so just thought it was a really, really interesting business, and obviously doing pretty well if they just announced a $100 million Series B.
That's a cool one. Have you been close to the product there? Like where any sense for kind of where they started or where they are today?
I haven't.
Yep. I mean, sometimes honestly it's hard to even pull out, but I was curious how they, I know they mentioned a lot about kind of EHR integrations, and I was just curious how they approached that early on. But that's a cool case study.
So let us know. Well, let's ask the listeners if you all know, or if you worked there. Tell us how you all started. What was the Wedge product? What was the initial offering? How did you guys get traction? And what's been the thing that's making the acceleration really happen?
We shared a piece here called Deus Ex CapEx. And really what we're talking about here is the current, AI-driven data center bubble. Bubbles, that's jumping ahead. We may not be in a bubble. We may be. That's an argument. We're really talking about the boom in AI infrastructure, right? So we are seeing just a crazy explosion of investment in data centers that, of course, is to kind of fuel the underlying demand for AI. There are probably about 10 companies out there that are generating most of this demand. There are a couple of big considerations here that we walk through. I mean, the first is really just, maybe a little bit less specific to vertical AI strategy, but just the pure amount of money that's going into these things. So this table, if you guys check it out, really what we're laying out here is by year, the amount of spend that is going into building these data centers, so like infrastructure spend, and comparing that to the revenue that's being generated from them. And the high level takeaway is that there needs to be about almost $1 trillion, at least over 800 billion in net new AI revenue just to pay back the investment that is going into these data centers. And of course, that investment continues to grow as well, so that kind of revenue gap, if you will, may also need to continue to grow. And that's a big number, right? That's like a sizable chunk of the Mag 7's current revenue. So I think there is the question of, are we in an AI bubble? Will everyone make their money back on these things? And what does that mean? I think the other point that we dig into is really more around AI pricing, and we'll get to that in a second. But Luke, have you run into any of these pieces or data points around just the data center boom?
Yeah. So I got a funny quick story for you. So we had the Teal Fellowship alumni kind of weekend, I don't know, a couple months ago. And there's probably 200 people there. And what the common question everybody asks each other, obviously, is like, what are you working on? What's going on? Right. And so the most crazy numbers I was hearing were all people building in and around the space. And they were companies that, are not on TechCrunch. Like they're Teal Fellow companies that have, flown relatively under the radar. But the ARR growth numbers that they were talking about were absolutely bonkers. Like I was talking to one guy who's doing like data infrastructure software in Europe. He's like, yeah, I went from 2 to 100 this year. I heard like 3 to 50. I was sitting there and I was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was like, this is insane. Vertical SaaS, I'm in the wrong business. But everybody who is growing like insane, and this was a couple of months ago, was in and around this space. So there's a lot going on here that is below like the NVIDIA headlines. There's a lot of dollars flowing all over this world right now.
Yeah, for sure. And we're seeing a lot of interesting deals go down. I mean, I won't go into all of them here, but, look, if you go to that little cycle graphic, it basically just shows, the recently announced, big investment by NVIDIA into OpenAI. OpenAI then is, making a commitment to Oracle. And it's just basically this big, kind of circular cycle of let's do a deal in order to facilitate our own revenue, right? It kind of reminds, some of those older listeners here might remember, WorldCom and kind of the telecoms infrastructure boom, like very just a lot of insider deals, kind of questionable in a way. But, the final point we draw out here is ultimately, hopefully what results from this boom is that, we have more supply. So AI pricing should get lower. And that, maybe has more direct relevancy to a lot of the vertical AI listeners on the call. And I think in a lot of ways we are seeing that. Like if you take one particular model, like, like 4.0 or whatever it is, and you track that model family over time, API pricing is decreasing. At the same time, of course, the frontier models, right, that pricing is not decreasing. So I think there are two considerations here. One is that if you are a business model that requires staying on the frontier at all times in order to maintain your customers or win them, you're not going to see the benefits of pricing decreases, from economies of scale. The second is, as we see more kind of reasoning-based AI, these HASs are getting more complex. So each per token price may be lower, but overall, maybe not. All right, everyone. Super excited to welcome on to the show Mike Kopko. Mike is CEO of Pearl Health, and I'll have him kind of give the rundown in a second. But I just want to preface with Mike is one of my oldest friends in venture. I think fun little story, Mike. What was it? 20 years ago? I think maybe almost as of this year.
Yeah, we go back. It might be on Princeton's campus even. I mean, it goes back a long ways.
I think what it was actually is we were in New York. We were in your apartment, and my friends forgot me, and I woke up and you were there, and you gave me a ride. And I think I didn't have shoes. We won't get too deep.
There was
into
no
that story,
alcohol involved. It sounds like.
It sounds like the end of the big night, Alex.
Yeah,
I think we were juniors in college, so give us a pass. But anyways, Mike, we won't talk about that today. Why don't you, if you don't mind, kind of share with our listeners a little bit on you and Pearl Health?
Well, yeah. So honored to be with you all. Tri-state area, born and raised. Kind of really grew up thinking a lot about things other than healthcare. I mean, I liked genetics, but I hadn't really thought of myself as a healthcare person. Kind of more as an entrepreneur, like opportunity pursuits. And so I started my career in finance. And then, I actually had a company I'd started in college, and Josh Kushner tried to invest in it. And I billed my clients up front. So I was like, I don't know why I need venture capital money. I don't want to lose your money. But when I left Bridgewater, Josh called and said, you've got to do this healthcare startup, Oscar. And if you don't do it, you're wasting your life, which was a pretty compelling pitch to his credit. I was like, whoa, it's a strong. And he said, come and do it for 6 months with us, help us with the sales part of it. And then you can leave if you want. And I was like, I hadn't quite figured out what I was going to do next. I wasn't going into finance, but I figured I might as well try it out. And then of course, 6 months becomes 7.5 years and a whole tour de force of building an insurance company. I probably wouldn't do that again. Just because insurance is so hard, but it gives incredible exposure to all the complexity of the system. It gives a really high level view, and then you get a chance to be an entrepreneur because you've kind of been through it. And I think it's really good to go through these cycles once or twice if you can before you're leading, because the pattern matching value is really high. But I got to a place, and I was very blessed, where I got to run our business, take the company public. And at that point, I wanted to go and focus on what Pearl does now, which is helping providers deliver healthcare in a better way, outcomes oriented, but then be much more involved in the financials of it. And to do that, you've got to have the data, the tech, you've got to be good with capital and money. And so providers before, the age of Pearl, and I mean, we're not the only ones that do this, but before the age when we kind of got started with a few others, it was just kind of impossible to do it. And so I think that's changing now, and we can talk about it today. But technology really is the big unlock for, I think, going to be a major shift in how we get healthcare. And it's going to also start changing a very complicated industry that very few people understand. They understand it in experience, and it's generally terrible. But under that very complex and expensive hood is a tremendous amount of ways to make money and to lose it for those who don't do well. And so I'm excited to be doing it. We're innovating. I think we're driving really good outcomes, and happy to share and discuss that today with you all.
Awesome. Well, one thing we like to do, Mike, just given, a lot of our listeners are founders or investors, for maybe folks who aren't healthcare mavens like you, could you just kind of break down super high level what Pearl does, what the product is?
Yes. So we focus on the senior population, Medicare, 65 and older. There are about 68 million of those people now. And we help their physicians, the doctors that they see, deliver better care by being anticipatory. And what that means very practically is we help avoid hospitalizations, whether you're going to go for the first time or you're going to leave and come right back, round trip it. Avoid going to the ER And then we also work to bring you care proactively because we know something bad is about to happen because we have a very predictive system. So that we've laid out over 6,000 physicians now and 250,000 seniors. And that system is starting to lower how many times people are going to the hospital, how many times they're going to the ER, their death rates, their cost of care, and we get to participate in those economics. And I can kind of walk through that. That gets a little bit complicated for folks who are not used to healthcare, but we get paid basically by reducing bad events in a population that consumes a lot of expenses because of those bad events.
Luke, before you pop in there, we were actually just talking about, time care before this. So could you help us understand, is it, so you work with the payers, is it per member per month? Is there risk bearing involved? Like how does the revenue flow? And then
we have two models and we are paid by both. We charge a software fee to our clients, which is the smaller amount of money we collect today. And then we participate in the savings we produce. So when we avoid that hospitalization, which costs on average $30,000, we participate in about 25% of that. So we'll get, being a little bit overly specific, we'll get about $7,500 or $8,000 per hospitalization avoided. And so you're kind of adding that up over large populations and over lots of events. It's like the law of large numbers. You're just doing a lot of these treatments, and then you're kind of getting compensated for reducing the cost of care. So in the time care model, it's somewhat similar because they're taking some of that risk, but unlike them, we are actually taking savings on the entire cost of your care. And for us, about $2.5 billion right now, and then next year it'll be about $3.5 billion. So we're trying to lower that by 3 to 5 points, and then we'll get a large portion.
How do you actually prove that you're avoiding hospital visits for the patients? Like what goes into that?
It's a great question. It's a question we spent a bunch of time on, and there are levels of certainty. So I think, the easiest answer would be a peer-reviewed longitudinal study of the Pearl treatment on our population and like a digital twin. We can't quite do that yet, though we'd be happy to do it with anybody, any academic group that was interested in it. What we are able to do easily is look at the people who follow our instructions and the people who don't. You can compare that. Now, there are some, if you're a statistician, there's some endogenous risks and blah, blah, blah. We can get into deep statistical concepts, but you can just look at large populations and say, hey, we're seeing 6% lower hospitalization here. Sure, there could be a lot of reasons that that's random, but at a minimum, we're getting paid for that. So you're in business studying. And then what we are, very confident about is when you break down about why we think we're getting it. In this case, we're calling someone right after they get discharged and saying, are you going to go back to the hospital? Can we get you an appointment with your doctor? And then we're seeing that appointment, and then we're seeing that reduction in hospitalization. Yes, JAMA might not certify that, but as a business person, you're like, it's working. And we want to do a lot more of it and a lot more of it at a lower cost so we can kind of cover everybody. And then we kind of keep doing that by treatment. And then we'll get a final validation when the government will say, hey, this is what the whole population costed you. And this is what the budget we allocated, and you had savings. And so there's a little bit of a proof in the pudding, but for the scientists, you have to go intervention by intervention and look at the outcomes. And we're doing that on the big things we're focused on.
And in most of this, it's around basically arming the doctors and then the patients with technology and tools. And you're doing a lot of proactive outreach and, getting them to that appointment, getting them to show up. Like is that where a lot of the tech kind of alpha is that's driving that?
I think the innovation in our model was to kind of reduce a very complex thing and do a couple of these things. So the first thing may not be a technology in a pure sense, but it's a regression principle of like, what are the big things that move the needle? Focus on the big things. And then the other unlocks we had our clients do a lot of this work. We competed in a landscape 4 years ago where the business model was, we're going to hire 150 people and we're going to do all of this work. And that cost model, it was up. I mean, my view was at that time, that cost model was an upside down model. It will never dig itself out of its expense burden. And we did not, this was pre-ChatGPT. People told us we were nuts. Like, no way this is going to work. Good luck. I'll see you when you're out of money. But on the flip now, I actually think the market says like, how long will people be required to keep doing this? Our own clients, when can we get voice AI? When can we get text, agentic text? Like when can we sequence transport with all of these capabilities? And so I think we're on the road in the next couple of years in kind of a very managed way to having it be very technology driven, almost pure play.
So there's a significant services element today where your team is basically doing a lot of that kind of patient communication post a hospital visit, getting them to the next.
Don't do our clients do it.
Clients do it. Okay.
The leverage for us is everybody skipped that the client was going to be willing to do a lot of it, and we said we think we can get them involved because the value of doing it, the retention of the relationship with the patient, and then boiling the simplicity down to, hey, we don't need you to change your whole life. We need you to make 5 to 10 of these phone calls a day. And look, these are the busiest people in the world. I mean, they have 50 hours of work to do in 40 hours. But the money and the outcomes are so powerful that many of our clients are doing it. And the ones that are not, that's where we're kind of starting to deploy the agentic capabilities.
I just want to go back to the dollar flow here for a second. So ultimately, the money is coming from the risk-bearing entity, the payer, right? So what is the incentive of the provider, your clients, and what's the incentive to you? Like to working with Pearl, I mean, obviously there's the mission, and I don't want to denigrate that at all, but, presumably they make more money with Pearl, and obviously Pearl makes money.
Yeah.
How do those dollars flow?
They make a lot more money, and I'll walk you through that. I mean, I care a lot about the outcomes. I know what world we're living in. The clients care, but in a lot of these offices, you got to pay the bills, and you have to start talking about money, even though the patient outcome is what drives everybody. I mean, everybody would be in a different industry if money was the only thing that mattered. But so a mission is kind of assumed with a lot of these folks, just because that's why we all got here. The money is better because of 2 reasons. One, we stabilize a lot of their compensation. That the person doesn't have to be in your office. You're still getting paid. The second is by doing these events, that hospital event, we're effectively a joint venture partner. I mean, that's a more complicated word, but we share in that upside. And so the call for them on that avoided hospitalization, in a very simplistic model, the government will get half of that 30,000. We get half, and we split that with the doctor. So everyone's going to get $7,500 for having a $100 visit with your primary care, for which they're getting paid. Plus, they're getting $7,500 on top for the avoided hospitalization. And that math is outrageously compelling because you've got to do a lot of $100 visits to catch up to a $7,500 drop to the bottom line. So, I joke, but I kind of remind people you could get basically a private physician on call at all times for one avoided hospitalization a year. You'd have more. You'd have like 2 doctors available to you at all times based on how we bill for these things. And so people understand, like, we've gotten to this place of waste and expense that's so outrageous that when you kind of pop that bubble and say, what if we consume this a different way? What could we bring to people? And a lot of this is really just moving care forward and more proactively, which most people would think this is how it works. It's just, we never set up our payment systems to pay this way. How about the payer?
Is the $7,500, is that coming from like a government kind of, kind of legal aspect around value-based care? Or is that what the insurance companies have put forward if you do the avoidant hospitalizations? Like, where does that come from?
Well, so if you thought about this more like from a financial construct, the government's basically giving off large blocks of expenses that they're going to pay anyway. So, let's take everybody listening to this podcast. The sum cost of all your care, number of people times average cost, is going to be $1 billion. And we come in and we say, hey, text us whenever you want something before going to the hospital, and we'll get it for you. And we come in at 900 million because we're just paying attention to people in a different way. We're trying to avoid the very outcome that the system gets paid for today. And so they say, cool, 100 million surplus. I'm going to take half of it because I'm the government or I'm the payer. How do you want to split 50 million? And I mean, we're doing that at 3 billion at scale today. And we've got competitors, and you mentioned Time Care. They're doing the cancer slice of that. So you could think of the total cost of someone's care, but then you could slice it. Heart disease, orthopedic MSK. You could go pediatric and go a little bit orthogonal, so like where you are in life. There's a lot of ways to cut this, but what we all want are systems that are going to start lowering the cost of care. We have a disease as a country of cost growth and frankly negative quality. I mean, it's getting worse and more expensive.
Let's switch a little bit more to kind of company building. So, I mean, this was a huge idea, right? And in a lot of ways, you got to win over multiple audiences, whether that's, the payers, the providers, the patients, right? So what was the first thing you felt like you needed to prove in early days?
When we were starting the business, I mean, besides the kind of entrepreneur's decision of, are you going to commit to this? Once I had kind of made my mental commitment that this is something, to do, I believe we needed to establish that physicians were going to be open to this type of practice. They would be willing to consider it. And so signing physicians was the first order. Right behind that was a system that would at least help them focus on a couple things to do. But very early on, anyone who's in healthcare technology, it takes a while to build and launch in healthcare. We can get into the reasons for that, but you don't have that same quick release feature early on. And so I focused on physicians, and then we focused on trying to pick the right ones when we got to that privilege. And then we focused on, what do we have them do? If we're going to have them do one thing or two things, and then we used technology early. The decision early was, we're going to do this from a technology perspective, because the scale, it would never scale if you have other alternative cost profiles. And we're now seeing kind of a lot of my competitors are just disappearing because they hire a lot of people, their run rates are insane, and then they don't get the behavior change, and then you're done.
Yep. So what was the wedge product that would get providers up in the morning, but was easy enough to build as an MVP?
The first wedge was really how we paid them. And the first system at Pearl is a payment system. And like the monthly wire, especially when we were rolling right out of COVID, and Pearl was, we were much smaller then, but we were shipping out $200,000 or $300,000 a month to clients. When you're first asked, I'd like to onboard you, do you have a Plaid account? And a lot of them didn't. So they're like, can you mail me a check? Like that was, and I know it's less sexy for the kind of health tech enthusiasts, but having been in the insurance world, the oxygen in the room is payments. Like, you want to talk about anything else, You better make sure you're oxygenated. And, getting the money flowing on a monthly, we had a couple times when the government was late to pay us. We paid on time. We have had zero issues on payments in terms of at a strategic client level. That has been true north. Money has to keep flowing. Then from that, you get this whole opportunity to talk about change. But I think the big thing is making sure you understand what your clients need. And it does start with financial viability.
Did you get that right out of the gate, or was that something that you guys kind of realized over time as you tried a couple other wedge products? And then secondly, what was the go-to-market approach in those early days, like getting these doctors bought in?
Well, I think we got it right out of the gate because I had done a version of this in my client.
Sure. Yeah.
It's good to have one experience before. And I was doing all the hospital deals at Oscar, and we didn't have all the tech that you may experience Oscar as now, but what we did have, and we almost to our fault, we paid on time and we paid well at Oscar. We didn't deny a lot. And so one of the selling features of the hospitals, and I'd show up and give them my cell phone number and say, we will pay you in 30 days and it'll be accurate. And if it's not, you text or call me. And I got no phone calls. I didn't get phone calls until I left. And so it was like, we knew that was, because they hated the other payers. So that was differentiator then. So it was clear to me differentiator here. And so it became clear for a while. And even early on, the first ways we won, if you want to talk about kind of being a little bit reckless, we would overpay to win certain clients. And we kind of knew it at the time. We thought, hey, if they worked hard enough, this won't be overpaying. We'll kind of make it back on all the things we're going to do together. But, you go back and you look at it, and Nick, you asked the question of, how well did they do relatively? The first 2 years, I had 95% of my clients, when we did like back testing, made more money than they would have not going with us. And the 5%, I looked at the 5% because I was like, how does that add up? We guaranteed them more with our kind of top up. And they had just changed their practice, and they were billing for other things that we couldn't capitate them for. And so, they had shifted their business model. And so that group, and we're kind of truth speakers, that group would have done better. And I always tell clients now, if you're going to change your business model next year, you got to tell me, because this isn't going to go well for you. And so they had shifted from working with primary care. They wanted to sell a lot of more expensive care, and our model wouldn't compensate them for that.
Interesting. So I guess early on was facilitating payments, but was this a model they were familiar with, maybe because of MSOs or something, or was it a totally new concept you had to convince them on?
A lot of healthcare actually winds up boiling down to the same stuff relabeled, and then often with complicated acronyms. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just to kind of keep your market power. But it comes down to like the basics at some level. You want people to reach out to a patient that you know something's happening with and they haven't addressed it yet. So it's kind of forcing a moment of connection with physician and patient. And so we were asking for that as one change. Sometimes around risk coding, because they weren't getting, when we talk about setting that initial budget, right? The $1 billion in your audience. Well, it can be 1.1 billion if you kind of recognize that a bunch of people have cancer and a bunch of people have this, diabetes. And if you don't do that in our current system, you don't get paid for it. So we wanted that. And then we wanted a lot of work around hospitalization. And with some of these new payment models, the one we're in is called REACH, again, an acronym, MSSP, another acronym for how payment models that the government designs are built. They really reward you for the reduction of hospitalization and timely follow-up around hospital events, like just talking to patients. And so we're asking them to do this. The problem is they don't get paid in the other world, they don't get paid for those. It's like they think of it as that's free labor. So you had to crosswalk them. And so we would create out some bonuses and incentives. So we'd kind of front them some of that money because we believed in it so much. To your first question, Luke, of how do you know? We started paying on it too. So you got to be right. If you're wrong, you're dead. So we started paying bonuses and advances. And then, you kind of got your results at the end. And I will say, just to be very frank with your audience, it took us 2 years to get into making money and generating savings, which is a land speed record as far as I'm concerned. But it's a tough business to build when you're kind of not having a positive revenue stream for 2 years. And a lot of my competitors, 5 years, 7 years, never got there. I mean, Oscar, by equivalent, we had a negative MLR for 7 years.
And like that, so that initial, I mean, I remember early on when you were just kind of, you guys were dialing providers, like obviously a lot of this came from your understanding how to talk to these folks from Oscar. But I mean, was that did you get people out of Oscar? I mean, that's like a fairly high expertise conversation, I would imagine. How did you build that go-to-market team in motion?
Some of them were Oscar, some of them were, rolled your sleeves up. Oftentimes, starting a new venture, you're kind of going down levels of job, right? If you're staying in the corporate world, you think of yourself as kind of graduating to new levels of work. In startups, you're often, starting at the earliest job set and figuring out how to make it work. So we were recruiting ourselves. You do know there are certain people that know how to work with physicians and kind of offer things to physicians in an effective way. And I think I have that skill set and know the people that do. So we were pretty comfortable working with those groups, but it's still very hard. And you've got to stick the landing. Once you win clients, you've got to do well by them. And this is true in any business. I always tell early entrepreneurs, awesome, you won that account. Is that account going to be a referral and a reference for you?
Yep.
You got to start thinking about that. It's not you won, it's did you deliver?
How well did you win?
Yeah, exactly. And so by the skin of your teeth, or have you built something now?
One question too I have, because I'm not a healthcare guy, so this is all a fascinating new world for me. But is this a net new kind of revenue stream for these doctors, or are they, like, if they're not working with you, it sounded like they have to do all of this in-house outside of a few of the competitors. Is that accurate? Like they have to kind of do all this analysis, get that capital from the government. And so they're basically saying, I'm going to split this with you and you're going to do, all the work and keep me accountable to doing the part that I need to do.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, it's going to be very hard for small groups to do what's going to happen in these kind of category. I mean, just in healthcare expenses in subscale form. And the reason why is to do this really well, you've got to know what's happening to people. And that's a data model prediction analytics business. And you got to go get other data. So you've got to be a good data buyer and analyzer. So, I mean, think financial markets, think academic research. Then you've got to sequence management or business information systems like your company to take predictions and then deliver outcomes consistently with that. Most subscale businesses,
you can't do it. No way.
Yeah. It's kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm going to go buy some software maybe, and then can I wire my organization to that? They're typically not built for that. And then lastly, you've got to reconcile and like financialize all of those inputs to know, am I getting more than I'm putting in? And I got to grow that because I got to kind of, so ultimately I think there will be a big consolidation in this category. It will hit some limits because, unlike search or other tech spaces, social media, there will be an inherent mistrust of a singular winner. So I think regulation will kick in and prevent a single winner, but the size is so big that 3 or 4 winners are, you're managing $1 trillion and you're still, you're on someone's radar, but you're not like a threat to being the monopolist.
And the TAM is just value-based care. That's the bucket.
I think of the TAM as expenses in healthcare.
Okay.
So I think of it as $4 trillion. And today, about 15% of that is, legitimately in these models or on the cusp of these models.
If we can, I'm curious, just go to market. So now you guys are scaling up, right? You found this payments kind of opportunity. You're tapping into, quite frankly, a new revenue stream for a lot of customers. Obviously, if they're bigger, they're doing some of it in-house. Now they can work with you on it. What for, someone who's thinking about starting a healthcare company, like what is the go-to? Is this outside sales, or are we looking like a medical sales rep company and going, healthcare facility to healthcare facility? Like what's the bread and butter to successfully run and deploy a GTM motion here?
For our business, we are interacting a lot with hospital systems now, large physician groups, predominantly ones that have primary care doctors, but not exclusively. And then we still interact with small primary care groups. There are about 400,000 primary care doctors in our country. About 300,000 of them are kind of eligible. We have 6,000 of that 300,000 now. So we're kind of getting on the market share roadmap, or the map, if you will. In the generic form of that question, if that's what you meant, Luke, you've really got to know your revenue model. And I think the hardest thing, especially first-time healthcare startups, I really push them on like, who is going to pay you and why? Because it's a complicated system with a lot of indirect flows, and you cannot figure that out on the job. I believe you've got to go in intentionally with a view of who is your customer. We went in knowing that pretty clearly, that we've moved up market over the last 5 years. We started with kind of the mom and pops, and, been very grateful and very proud of our team. We're now working with the best hospital systems in the country.
Is that a typical evolution to start with mom and pops and move upstream like it is in a lot of verticals? Or, I know like the open evidence guys, the Abridge guys, it almost seems like they've gone the opposite direction. Do you have any views there?
Yeah, I would say it's, we're an anomaly. And in certain ways, I would not have believed we would have gone this quickly to it, because it's so hard culturally, typically, to do that shift. So I would say it's probably not the case. I think a lot of it relates to like, what's the innovation you're bringing to market, and where does that innovation create the most value? You used to say disruptive, but I actually think disruptive is a negative word in healthcare. But like, where's the value unlock greatest? So in the Abridge model, a little bit is like luck, I think, for him. And I think Shiv will be honest about that, of ChatGPT hits, large systems say, hey, what are we doing about this? OpenAI is still not ready. No offense to them. They're still not ready to help healthcare organizations do anything substantial in healthcare. And he's ready. And he didn't, did he predict that? And then hospitals, and then all of a sudden I got 200 hospital clients or whatever he's got now? Probably not. But, at some level he deserved it. 5 years, fighting away at being ready for the moment. And, the go-to-market and the sales process in healthcare is tough. The decision-making is super slow. It's very reference-based. It is not as pressure-driven. So, you've got to really understand the kind of the vector, and then you've got to make sure you get the right talent to introduce your solution to that category.
Yep. So one more question, then I want to spend the rest of our time on AI. So you said, Mike, you got to really understand where your revenue is coming from. In your case, what do you do? What does Pearl do to understand the government, the players in the government, and where it's headed? Because, in a lot of ways, that's where the revenue is coming from, or at least where we're helping on cost.
Well, I've gone through a couple of phases. I think the first gift I was given was, time with Ray at Bridgewater, where we were in the credit crisis in 2008, and it got very political. People forget that even though we feel partisan now, there were always these moments. And I just remember Ray saying, I don't care what your opinion is. I care what's going to happen. So drop your politics at the door. Tell me where's the puck going on a policy level, because that's where we need to be. And that's where we need to get our clients to be. So, I think the first thing is like your approach to this. And my approach has always been like trying to understand just what's going to happen next. Who cares about my politics? In fact, in healthcare, it's a negative to have your politics on your sleeve, because there are 330 million clients in the US for us, and we're not going to agree on how we see it and govern the world. So know what's going to happen next. When we started at a very small stage, we had good talent. So we started just kind of sharing our experience, kind of like almost in blog format, but we would send notes to some of the folks who were designing these programs at CMMI. Always the goal was to not be parochial, meaning we weren't looking for them to give us special gifts and dispensation. It was, hey, did you know that this policy is having this effect? And could give an example of it. But the way you have rules around who must follow certain quality reporting causes a lot of specialists to not even be able to be included in these cool programs. And it creates these perverse dynamics when you get really close to it. So we would kind of let people know about that. And we, I think, built a credibility that these people are kind of just reporters on the ground who are also playing the game. And anyway, we've moved to now is we still do that, but there are a couple hard-hitting moments where I think when it impacts all of us, like we see ourselves as the group that helps organize the letter on behalf of the industry. We will sometimes organize those letters. But I do not, I still have not, I will not go in and say Pearl needs this. And I meet with some of the folks now that are in these jobs. They're very gracious. They host you. They're incredibly open. But I start up front. Like, I hope nothing comes across as me looking for any kind of favors. I'm here to just tell you my experience, and we want this end state. And these are the things that I help get to the end state.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about AI. So Pearl started pre-ChatGPT. How have you thought about how to explore that, where to layer it on? What have you built in AI that maybe wasn't possible when you started?
I've been excited about it. We did start before, so we were very big predictions, analytics, data science. LLMs for us, because we were not a native AI company when we founded the company. We were not an engineering and R&D lab. We were a kind of technology applied business. It was kind of more of a watershed moment. The first thing it did was really more internal tools and productivity. And, the team, went to it quickly and immediately, and the whole bake-off of who's the best, and running multiple experiments. So it was really an internal lift first. The second effect I saw is that clients and our executive relationships at our clients started talking about how we could help them get to a different place, because this kind of made it socially acceptable to go there. And I think people who are in healthcare need to appreciate this is a very human-powered business, and you have to understand and respect it. I love technology. I think technology is a major tide that lifts all boats. But if you don't understand how to introduce and talk about it, you can be left without any partners. And so it's not an anti-technology story. Don't get me wrong. It's in fact deeply pro, but it has to be kind of a hand in glove with the people that are at least currently serving patients. And then that may change over time. And so what we've seen specifically for us, a lot of healthcare is contact work. Almost call center. And that I think is rapidly going to change. We'll still have some human powering in it, but just the amount of things we want to contact a patient about, and the lack of A/B testing and the lack of standardization, there is going to be a massive transformation in how we interact, contact, sequence, schedule patients. It's kind of the non-clinical. I mean, it is clinical if you're in the industry, but as someone who's outside of it thinking about it, it's not the doctor work. It's the how do you kind of sequence a lot of things and that kind of those logistics. The second thing I think it's going to do, open evidence you mentioned, it's going to radically bring online a lot of intelligence, which is going to make a lot of decision-making better. I don't know yet the manifestation. I think replacing your doctor with AI is going to be tough, but I can imagine this kind of chat-like model where you get a better service and attention, and they're already doing it. People are already doing it. For us, it's starting to figure out who are the alternative delivery and logistics partners. Like, think delivering drugs, think getting telehealth consults to people, like a cardiologist calling you. Think of your mom, your grandmother. They're calling. Why are they waiting 6 weeks to have to get in their car to then go to see their car, sit in a room for, ridiculous. So now there'll be some imaging and other components, like we need to get a test. But if you start really unpacking and repacking the supply chain, that's going to start happening in experimental form, but pretty rapidly. You're going to be blown away in 10 years. The experience is going to change really quickly. And so we're going to be a part of that. And a lot of it's going to be just around how do we repackage and deliver healthcare at a much cheaper and kind of ground game level. Your doctor, your care team, nurses, chatbots, voice specialists. Let's avoid those expensive facilities unless it's necessary.
Yep. I mean, Mike, I think you put it well. Like, I don't know if I I mean, sometimes it's hard to call healthcare an industry because it's like whatever percentage of the GDP it is, it's like many industries, but there's so much latent frustration with the system on behalf of everyone around things that are so well suited to what LLMs do. As you said, like voice, text, follow up, like a trusted source of information. Yet I think we're in this testing phase right now where obviously some stuff is working great. But I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen something that, it's like selling into, like you said, cardiology clinics. And it's a great idea. It makes sense. And it just doesn't take hold. I mean, do you think as you look across the like spectrum of challenges that early stage healthcare AI startup founders face, is it distribution? Is it like that the technology is not quite there yet? Is it like clinician psychology? Like, how would you rank some of these challenges?
Well, I would say in the macro, the aggregate, we're all winning because there's going to be this massive flood of capital and talent presenting all these innovations, and a bunch will stick and a bunch are not. They're going to fail. A lot of them are going to be great. And some of them are like the keyboard, like it's just a standard. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but we're all doing it. And so we'll regret parts of it, but it'll also just kind of standardize. Epic's kind of the classic keyboard. It's standardized a lot of great things. A lot of people hate it. No offense, Judy. But so there is this kind of huge macro thing happening where I think healthcare is seeing it and it's coming, and the mindset has been incredible. The shift, I actually am very impressed with the industry. Very few people are playing the Luddite game right now of get your technology out of here. There will be some, but I'm very proud of this industry, how open people are. So I don't think it's going to be an if at all. It's going to be when. Now, individual startup that we all may have backed, I get it. Everyone wants them to win. But there's kind of the greater whole question, and they all can't win. For the ones that aren't, consolidating, merging, partnering can often be a very effective way to do it. You always, don't see it that way. And then I think your comments around LLMs, kind of chat, the industry is slowly turning toward a more consumer focused one. It will not always get there because for as long as you're not the one paying the bill, just remember the other person paying that bill is the satisfaction component that you're not getting. Now, it may not be in the form you want, but if you're paying 10% of your healthcare boat, 90% is going to somewhere else, and someone is servicing that 90%. So I think a lot of customer frustration is kind of the failure to recognize that, yes, you're an important part of the equation, but you're, in some cases, not even the only part, not even the majority part. Limits what you as a normal consumer experience, like when you're getting your burrito delivered. Why is it 3 minutes late? This is outrageous. They stopped because you're the payer. I paid for this. You don't have that same reaction when it's something that's being bought for you. You can't, and the product isn't designed for that. And so I think I teach a class at Columbia. I always remind people, you got to think about, there are trade-offs. If you want to pay for your own healthcare, which I can assure you most people when they're given that vote will not choose that, you're going to get a lot more consumer-focused care. Now, what's happened is this kind of like compromise. You can buy a lot of stuff now as a consumer and you've got some choice. So you're going to use that really well. And there'll be increasingly modalities or products that design to your experience, and it'll win business. Think about, you just mentioned time care, right? So they're winning a lot of clients by just adding a concierge feature to accessing complicated services in healthcare. The payer is actually still their employer, but they're wrapping this concierge experience, which kind of says, well, this is I'm more cared for, I'm happier. And that's kind of that compromise. If it was all paid by the consumer, you'd be getting a lot of different things, I'd argue. You're getting even more consumer attention.
And how do you think about that push and pull between, I'm going to start up, I actually want to do care delivery versus, almost the more, the joint venture model, if you will, where the clinician retains that core relationship and you power them?
Well, I mean, the good thing, and you mentioned about whether it's an industry or it's, just a society now, civilization in its own right, there are a lot of ways to be successful in healthcare. So I don't really want to be too judgmental. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs. I think the biases that I think tend to be pretty true are labor-based services models are tough. They're low margin by design. They're, lots of variability in input costs. The market switches a lot, so you're always changing who's your buyer. If you're thinking about a service model that's going toward agentic capabilities, I'm interested in that. If you're thinking about a really outdated service model that is going to transform, there are some that work, like Forward, the clinic model. I thought that was going to be a real struggle. futuristic clinic is always a tough model. It's just so capital intensive, and most of the capital, most of the kind of really forward capital markets don't like capital intensive by and large. So it's just tough. Drugs and biology have always been compelling just because of the distribution power of it and the technology association. So it really depends on your model, but I've really shied away from the employment and the labor model because it is incredibly it's 50 regulatory bodies you got to go through typically too. So it's really tough to get to scale. I mean, venture, it's tough for. If you have a mission orientation, you want to open up your own office, that's different. You can do whatever you want. But if you want to build a national solution, I think anything that's really heavy on concrete or labor becomes tough.
What's your? I'm curious on this one. I haven't heard much from GC on this like hospital system that they bought. Do you have any view of that? I mean, it goes into what you just said about, high labor and those are tough models, but have you thought about that at all, of actually like buying some of these quote unquote end customers?
We have a little bit, and I can't say I know the inner strategic discussion on Hatco and some of the other deals that they've been focusing on. But at one level, as a venture capital firm, you love it because it's kind of this innovation lab and kitchen that you can kind of really accelerate your development cycle because you can really explore real world impacts. I think anybody who thinks they can run it better than others through that strategy, I would not, see it that way. Now, I may be missing things, but in terms of, strong views loosely held, it's an impossible business model out of the gates. The only people that have figured it out, you think of the HCAs, the tenants, is massive scale and deep discipline, and so they're big and they do the thing they do really well. You call them an offer of value-based care and they'll be like, we have maybe an innovation group, but you're not talking to my mainline execs. We are excellent at what we do and we've got to stay focused. So, I think you've got to know what you do. We do not get too tempted to buy our practices. It's just not our business model. And I think a lot of physicians in truth don't really want to be owned. And I don't get into the psyche of the doctor too much because they're all individuals, but I have not met a lot of them. Academic systems are an exception, but often they've done it for a very practical reason. It's not kind of the end state, though that's been changing in the last couple of generations just because of how impossible it is to run your own practice. The economics are just so against you.
And I think we're seeing that across a lot of different verticals, even outside of healthcare, right? There's always a continuous push and pull between consolidation and going independent. But at the end of the day, it's the provider or in another vertical, the business owner who builds the trust with the consumer. And there's still a human thread there. Luke and I are each going to do a quick fire, 1 second question for you. And then I think we're at time. I'll kick off. Are there any, like you mentioned earlier, folks are slicing and dicing by specialty, age, oncology, pulmonology, et cetera. Are there any specialties or areas that you think are kind of on the rise or maybe underserved by startups these days? Like if you had to start one in one space, where would you start?
It's a good question. I mean, I think cardiology is one that's made some really cool innovation. It's a massive disease category and a massive expense category. Also, unfortunately, the cause of a lot of early loss of life. So I think on a mission level, in an organization level, it's a really compelling one. I think there's something like 80,000 cardiologists out there, maybe a little bit off on the number, but that's kind of the rough amount. So when you start getting to that number, you can start saying, hey, I can kind of organize and create services for them. This is not new. There are companies out there, but I think ones that have a really high impact on disease burden, cost, and life, and then you apply technology and they're kind of the center of the experience, are big. I love what's happening in the oncology space. Neurology, I think, is coming. We have not figured out dementia at all yet. I mean, at a drug level, there hasn't been a breakthrough, but then there is a just huge challenge. Anyone who's into longevity, you've got to answer the back end of that, because as you get older, your statistical chances of dementia-related issues it's just kind of approaches one as you cross over 100, 105. So I think there's just a lot of fertile ground, but it's also hard work. These are not easy prescriptions to build systems and solutions in those categories.
All right, and I got one final one. And Mike, thanks so much for your time, man. I've learned a lot. You're a total whiz, so really appreciate you spending time with us. My final one is healthcare and insurance are the two verticals you spent much of your career in. Very difficult verticals. Why is healthcare a little bit easier than insurance?
They're somewhat brothers and sisters. You can't separate them easily today because nobody wants the risk. And so as much as we want to punish and hate our insurance companies, they're the only non-government risk bearers. Healthcare is easier because you are more liked in it. People see you as the healer. I mean, the doctor and their team, the most loved and trusted by far, by a country mile. So your mission and the support of the people around you, it's great. It's still hard. Insurance, I think, is actually at scale a fairly straightforward game. I know insurance people would say that's crazy to say that right now because of how tough it's been lately. But, it's a game of might and systems. But I think for a lot of people, it's tough in terms of societal contribution. I don't have the same exact view on that. But, we're going through a tough spell where there's a lot of anti-insurance sentiment, and I think understandably so. I know that's how I think about them today.
Super helpful.
Awesome. Well, Mike, this was a ton of fun. I know Luke and I both learned a lot, and we really appreciate you joining us today. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it, man.
Absolutely.
Right. Good luck.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right, Nick, that was a killer episode, man. My mind is spinning. I am not a healthcare guy, and I learned a lot today. I'm sure a lot of the audience did. It is quite the beast of a vertical, if you can even call it that. Huge shout out to him for coming on. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. Huge shout out to all the listeners. Hope you all enjoyed it. I want to give big recognition to Paraffin. Paraffin has made our podcast possible. Paraffin provides ready-to-launch financial products that help your merchants grow. If you're a vertical SaaS business, you haven't checked them out, go do that. They're providing a whole host of products, embedded capital, embedded spend, a lot of tools that really drive revenue, retention, and TAM for your business. Super thankful to Paraffin for partnering with us on this, and looking forward to next week with you, my friend.
See you guys next week.
All right.